What exactly needs to happen in our hands when we perform a handstand? In this video, we're gonna cover the art of hand balancing using our fingers and all the different areas of our hands to a level of granularity, of details, of depth that I'm pretty sure you have never encountered before, because this is the way we roll in the Handstand Academy. What's up everyone, this is Vincent Vis, and today we talk about balancing, which is a tricky subject, and there's so many things to be spoken about on that matter. What you have to understand is that balancing is just one piece of the equation. And that's very confusing at first, because of course, when we see somebody holding a handstand, we think that it's all about learning what to do to hold this position, the balancing skill itself. And this couldn't be further from the truth. Here's an analogy I like to use in classes. When you look at a professional tennis player and you don't know anything about tennis, you basically see a person swinging their rackets and hitting that ball. And so you may think, well, the only thing I have to do to become a professional tennis player is to learn how to swing my arm and hit the ball. It's just a matter of accuracy, seeing the ball being thrown at me, positioning myself, and swinging my arm. Well, of course, it's much more complicated than that, because you have to work on this movement, the effects that you can impart onto the ball to trick your partner. You have to work on your spatial awareness and ensure that the partner doesn't trick you into going on one side, forgetting about the other side of the court. You have to be good close to the net and far from the net. You have to work on your service and many other components that I don't know of because I don't do tennis. This, you can apply it to whatever hobby you are into, whether it is yoga, gymnastics, ballroom dance, tennis or football. It's the same. It's a complex movement practice. And so the athlete that goes through it has to work on their coordination, their stamina, their flexibility, their strengths, and different motor patterns that are very different from each other. But the same happens in handstands. We obsess over the balancing part, but if you do not know how to kick up, if you do not know how to position yourself in such a way that you can balance, if you do not have enough stamina, if you are not able to hold yourself in such a way that your body stops moving when you're upside down, it doesn't matter that your balancing skills are top-notch, you will not hold a handstand. Handstands are like a chair that has many different legs. The chair is stable when all the legs are sturdy. But what people are doing is that they overemphasize the relevance of one of those legs, balance, at the expense of all others. So they have a chair that has one big leg and a lot of fragile legs. And of course, the moment they sit on it, it collapses. And they think, well, surely my balancing skills are not good enough, so I'm gonna make them even better. Well, that's wrong. You're making the problem worse. You're delaying your progress. Actually, you need to go back to your foundations. Those foundations are important. And before we start talking about balance, of course, I'm gonna remind you that all those foundations, including the nitty-gritty of balance and the kick-up and the alignment and the fear, all this is addressed in my online course called The Rockets, in which I work with you personally through what is, without any doubt, the most comprehensive curriculum out there. But on top of that, I work with you to ensure every week that you're doing things the right way and that we are selecting the drills that work best for you, and that I show you on screen what is going wrong and what is going right, so that you can maximize your progress as if I was behind your shoulders at home as you practice your handstands, which is the best way to progress fast. Let's talk about what happens in our hands. It may sound obvious, but many beginners that come to class do not realize that handstands are the art of balancing on our hands through our hands. The balance itself happens because our hands are doing something specific. Ideally, they're the only element that we're gonna use to balance. We're not gonna use our body in motion this way, upside down, using our legs to recover our pelvis and whatnot. This implies that handstands are not a static position. It looks static, but it's not static. At first, your handstand is gonna be full of motions forward and backwards. That's kind of what it is like. A handstand is your body falling this way and that way, and this way and that way. But then you become so good at macro correcting those things that suddenly you move in more and more subtle ways to the point that we barely see you moving. That's what a handstand feels like. You're still moving, even at a top touch level. And if you want to follow me with this, just spend a few seconds standing upright this way, closing your eyes. You are still, are you not? And feeling what happens in your feet. And you will see how much movement is actually happening here. You're constantly in motion, but your body knows very intuitively how to rebalance so that you stay upright in a position that can be conflated with stillness. But as the saying goes, we only really still when we are dead. The same happens in handstands. You are always in motion. You learn to make those corrections smaller and smaller. And on that same tangent, the movements that happen in your body are reflected by the corrections and the weight changes that we feel in our feet here. The same will happen in handstands. Your hands will react to changes of the position that you have. There's a form of feedback loop here. If I fall forward, I will feel my fingers much more prone to squeezing the floor to prevent me from falling and crushing my face on the floor. And if I fall backwards, that's not going to be quite the same. If I fall backwards, my fingers are probably going to be useless. And if I exaggerate, my fingers can even start lifting off the floor. So before we talk about the different movement patterns that happen in our hands and that we can actively make the most of, we have to map out what our hand is about. And so in handstands, we're going to talk about different areas in our hands. And there's a little footnote to begin with. That is, we're going to assume that your hand position is somehow similar to having both hands spread on the floor, either with fingers flat on the floor or with your fingers a bit curled, whichever you prefer, and usually either with those two fingers parallel to each other or those two fingers parallel to each other. You have to understand that, one, this is not the only way handstands are being taught across the globe. Some schools will actually favor very different hand positions. And two, there is a wealth of individual variability amongst people. I remember a friend and coach who had a handstand that looked this way because of a variety of reasons, and that worked for him. This is an invitation from me to remind you that you are unique, and that's why I became a teacher, and that's how I teach in person and online, embracing your unique strength, your unique body and needs to find your handstand, rather than saying, you could balance this way, I don't care, this is how handstand should be, therefore stick with it. You know what? This is going to lead you to frustration and to quitting handstands. So we have different areas in our fingers, in our hands, and the ones that we want to start identifying first are the tip of the fingers, the first knuckles where the fingers start, the root of those fingers, and the heel of the hands, which is the base of the hands. And so the first thing you want to feel is that depending on how your body is placed in space, the weight distribution between those 3 points will be very different. If you kick up against the wall and you bring your leg towards the wall slowly, going from what we call a V shape to a feet together shape, you should feel that the weight travels from the heel of the hands towards the fingertips. If scenario B, you kick up against the wall and you brought your shoulders, your armpits away from the wall, you should feel something happen around your first knuckles, and you may feel that your heels have become increasingly heavier. Why is this so important? Because the weight transfer in your hands precedes the loss of balance. In a scenario in which I have a V shape and I hold my handstand here,
my weight is distributed in a certain way in my hands. If I bring this foot towards the other, the weight distribution will change in my hands, notifying me that if this keeps happening, I am on the verge of falling. And if I keep indeed doing it, I will fall, because the position I end up being cannot be balanced.
There is therefore a series of red light flashing in my fingers in terms of perception, in my brain in reality, telling me, dude, you are about to fall. I'm about to give in. There's only so much I can fight for this. You have to react. And if I choose to ignore it, of course, I end up falling. Let's zoom on our other scenario. I hold a handstand. I pay attention to what my hands are doing, how the weight is distributed here, and I'm going to bring my shoulders backwards towards the wall behind me. Same idea. The weight is going to transfer, it's going to travel through my hands, and I will feel little by little that I am getting out of what we call in the Handstand Academy your balancing zone. Right now, I am in the balancing zone, and if I move my shoulders backwards slowly, I'm going to get it out of what can be controlled. And it's not day and night. It doesn't go from 0 to 100. There's a lot of warning signals being sent that I have to be able to see as the weight travels in my hands to react and save that from happening and keep balancing longer. And this is where the power of this lies. And you see, we're not even trying to balance, we're trying to pay attention to what happens in our hands when we are upside down. In terms of body awareness, I would have you, if you haven't reached yet our freestanding freedom standard, 15 seconds in the middle of the room pretty much whenever you want, I would invite you to go back to the wall and explore what happens in your hands when you move specific body areas, more specifically your shoulders, your pelvis, and your legs, forward or backward, and see what happens there. Because until we have those things clear, things are not going to be easy to balance either with the wall or without it for long and or consistently. We have to know what it feels like to be on the verge of falling forward and having to bail. We have to know clearly what it feels like to be, on the other hand, on the verge of falling backwards, so that we can course correct using balancing patterns. What are those balancing patterns? Well, there's a couple of them, believe it or not. And there are some disagreements in the industry about what is actually happening and what actually can trigger your body to move forward or backwards. One of the disagreements we may have, for instance, that you may notice, is the power of the core in this rebalancing action. It is sometimes said that engaging the core allows you to move a specific way, versus people like me who would actually say that this is irrelevant to your balancing unless you are ultra flexible, in which case squeezing the core may help you stabilize things, which itself is a prerequisite for balance, but not triggering the balancing itself. That's it for us today. There's much more we could talk about when it comes to finger control. If you have any question, let me know in the comments. And if you want to find out more about the science of handstands and all the other motor patterns we discussed today, and all those we haven't had time to talk about, head to the link in the description and find out more about the rockets.